Welcome to Now I See a Person Institute. We are a research and training institute using collaborative dialogical practices to rebuild lives. Here we see you as a person, not as a diagnosis that may have defined or limited you in the past. Here we believe in you. The narratives of pain and suffering our clients begin with are transformed into conversations honouring their innate strengths, resilience, and hopes for the future. This podcast is to inspire and share stories of hope and healing for both people who suffer and the people that are trying to support them. Our work is made possible by donations.
Hello, my name is Dr. Susan Swam, and I'm Executive Director at Now I See a Person Institute. And with us today, we have David Abramovich, who is faculty at Now I See a Person Institute. And then we have somebody that has just entered into our recovery coaching program and also has been on some panels with us in the last couple of months. And today we're wanting to take some time to talk about the last two events that we've been able to participate in and how we would like to move forward with that. But first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about Now I See a Person Institute. Now I See a Person Institute is a nonprofit, and most of our clients have histories of severe psychiatric diagnoses or narratives, and have been able to, what a lot of our clients have responded in creating a beautiful life and no longer identifying that they are a psychiatric diagnosis, and in such finding freedom and beauty in life. And so I also wanted just to specifically address the conference that we were able to do on this last Saturday. And in that conference, we had a panel of both clinicians who had family members that had experienced significant trauma and therein significant diagnoses that they were assigned to at some point in time. Participants who themselves had experienced those types of journeys, and a wonderful participation of people from all over the world who were interested in the title of our conference and the meaning behind it. So I'm just going to read from the abstract. And so we had a quote that said, "When the author was asked what enabled them to talk, she shrugged her shoulders and said, 'Because you were just normal.'" And the title of our workshop was called Normalizing Ourselves for the Clients. So we had Pavel and Susan and a guest panel of recovering peer coaches invited participants to process what happens when people who go through severe psychiatric histories are met with dignity, humanity, and where dialogue is put first, where people who suffer are able to co-create an atmosphere that feels normal enough to deal with abnormal situations. And that this is a process that facilitates trust, hope, self-agency, self-determination, and absent of formulaic or predestined actions, an open, humanizing discussion, a place of safety and generative participation, embraced both by the clinician and client, a mutual partnership where free to care and support the novel inherent in all interaction. And, I'm just going to go ahead and talk first about just even the title and the abstract. So the words in this text represent what we have been doing at Now I See a Person Institute since 2007. At first, we were a nonprofit that worked with a lot of victims of crime, people that were in maybe the foster care system, and were in danger of losing their children, or other types of situations where there was very severe trauma. And we see these symptoms that arise when people go through significant trauma as coping mechanisms, and not necessarily that these symptoms are then a diagnosis of being bipolar or borderline personality or schizophrenic or obsessive compulsive, ADHD, or any of those types of descriptions. Our clients evolved to come up with their own descriptions of what was happening with them when they were going through the severe symptoms. And then afterwards, when those symptoms purely dissolved, and that lives were redesigned without having a diagnostic label to explain the suffering that they had gone through. And for me, having people that were able to accompany us both last month and this month was truly remarkable. It was a it, it was a place where people could safely talk about being on healing journeys, of leaving behind, again, pain and suffering and symptoms, and ways that clinicians were able to help, and ways that clinicians perhaps were not being able to help in the past. So during this, especially this last workshop, we invited people to continue in meeting, and we're hoping that in a few months that we can have another conference based upon the thoughts and ideas that were generated in this one, and that we become a community of support for each other. So I'm going to end my introduction and then open it up to what our wonderful guests would like to comment on, what was important to them, and then what is important for them today, or what was important for them during the previous panels, and what they would like to share. So whoever would like to go first, please do so.
Well, I will go first. This is David Abramovich, and like Dr. Sim said, I'm faculty at Now I See a Person Institute, and I've been honored to do this type of work for the last 10 years. And this conference really highlighted the importance of our work, the importance of really being collaborative with our clients, and not looking at them as clients at all, but as experts in their own lives, and really having the time and the space in our heart to listen intently and come up with, you know, what will make that person okay in that point in time. And then everything seems to fall into place if you just do that. If you just open your heart and open your ears and speak from your heart and speak the truth and be transparent. I think the relationship between client and therapist, for lack of better words, transcends any prior diagnosis which they have received in the past, and allows them to see hope in the future and propels them to new heights, and gives them new meaning in their lives, and all these symptoms that were possibly holding them back just evaporate. Very remarkable process to be a part of. And it's not anecdotal. It doesn't just happen once in a while. It happens in every single case that we've worked on. So that's what I'd like to impart in this podcast today.
Thank you so much. When you were, I was just going to reflect on a couple of things when you were talking, and I think that again, we were so privileged to have this wonderful panel, and the participants who were hearing from our panel and then talking about how this impacted them as clinicians and as people. We were able to receive many emails afterwards on some questions and some just feeling support and their own for themselves and for their roles as being clinicians. And I think that for us as clinicians, that we do need a space in this community where we can um, feel support and share with each other stories. And who best is to share stories than the people who actually are receiving the services. So for me, the process of having both clinicians, both people who had been with the services, and then people who had been with the services and then were coming back after a while to do coursework for a recovery course is very exciting. And just the nature of having of the humility of all the participants, because a lot of times when we go to school, and like say you go to school for 12 years or 10 years or 8 years or how many years you went to go become a therapist, you have your head filled with all of these ideas of what people should and shouldn't do, and your intentionality is so good. But unfortunately what happens is that what happens to the client coming in. And I think that, if anybody knows the history about Now I See a Person Institute, that's why it's called Now I See a Person Institute, because we make room for the client, not for what necessarily we were taught in books or in our training. That is good standard of care. That good standard of care is like process ethics, and it happens in each therapy session. And the clients have to be the ones that are reflecting back to the clinician what is helpful, what perhaps could be tweaked, what direction did they want to go into. And when you say that it's I can't remember the words that you were using to describe this process, but it's a very joyful process for us as clinicians. And because we have that relationship and that trust and the humanizing actions that happen within each conversation that we have with people. And that I'm just so pleased at this point in time that they can be a part of this process with us and continuing to have more panels and more discussions, and having people that have been with us over the past 2 months, but even new participants coming in and having this support of maybe thinking about things just in a slightly different manner, of really honoring the voice of the client. And we're not always taught that. I think we've always taught to respect a client, but not to honor their voice, honor where they're at that point in time, and not be the bearer of knowing what to do in each session, but figuring out together in a collaborative, generative process. So I wonder if maybe I could open it up then to one person that was this wonderful person that's with us today, that was on the panel and is also going to be helping us design this recovery coach program. And there you go. Yeah.
Hello.
No.
First off, I wanted to say thank you for wanting to listen to me, and thank you for involving me in this conversation. I'm very grateful for the space to discuss on how to help people, and how do we explore the conversation of how do we best support people in their journey. And there were a lot of things that really stood out to me in this meeting, but mainly the fact that there's this idea that people heal very naturally and normally when you treat them normally and when you care for them in a matter that is not, well, it's not demonizing certain aspects of themselves.
Mhm.
It's allowing space for people to explore and for people to, figure themselves out. And I think that that's such a beautiful process of just learning how to walk with people. And, you know, um, there's, again, going back to the idea of like, people will just recover on their own. And they'll, if you give them the space to, they're going to learn how to open up to people and they'll slowly start growing like plants. I really appreciated how, like, there was a commentary that really stood out to me because I've never spoken with this person before. But his name is Christopher, and he said that we are creaturely, which has kind of sat in my mind within the past couple of days because we totally are. And that's why I think it's so beneficial sometimes. Um, it's so beneficial to like work with animals like you do at Now I See a Person, because we're reminded, oh, life is so much more simple than sometimes our anxieties or like our stresses make it out to be. So like things like keeping a routine has been um, something that I was like really inspired to like look into after this meeting. Um, but yeah, I'm also really just grateful to see the amount of people that care and want to make a change within the field and just are open enough to listen to other people.
So I think when our colleague Chris was talking about that, he was also talking about how I think he's tried to incorporate that very much within his career. Um, as we talked in the panel, that he had a smart car that he would um, take a lot of kids in, and they would go out in nature and they would have these conversations, so that again it was normalizing ourselves in this process, because as clinicians we're not really taught to normalize ourselves. We're kind of taught to be a little bit standoffish because we don't want to get too close to the client, that somehow we might damage the client in that way by doing things that would be inappropriate, like inviting them over to our house, or you know um, having our meet our aunt, uncle, or something like that. And so I do think that you can have this intimacy and closeness, and that it can be created, whether it's in a lake, by a lake, or at a horse ranch, at a park, or even via Zoom or in people's houses. It's really the concept of how do we normalize ourselves for the other person. And I think we were having a conversation about this, that when we used to do a lot of work at the horse ranch that we really don't do anymore. We're out there one day a week, but a lot of our work is either going into people's homes, being at parks, or via Zoom, and using the horses as well, which I think has been very expansive for us and offering a lot of options. But I remember when we first were having children come to the ranch, and not everybody wanted to be around the horses. There were some children that were very kind of like cityfied, and so they might want to. We had a dollhouse, or Legos, or um, lots of crayons and paper for them to be able to draw on, even books to read. And so being able to use that context of, again, normalcy. Um, and so that it's not like you're coming in and seeing your cardiologist and you've got these fluorescent lights, and it's going to be, because it's a much different process. Your cardiologist can give you tests to say, you know, I think your blood levels aren't okay and you need to start doing more of this. But trauma and resultant symptoms are not like that. It's not like you can have a blood test or something and that people are going, we are going to say like, okay, so I think you need to do A, B, and C. Although I think that as clinicians, like when we're in training, we're often taught that some of those things are successful. But for us, the true success lies within that collective generation of meaning, the collaboration between the person who's suffering and the clinician to develop a trusting relationship of mutual respect and mutual trust, and then have conversations about how the person who's suffering is want to change, not how we want them to change, because we cannot ever know how it is for them to suffer. They know what it is to suffer, and they know how hard it is. And by them sharing those types of topics with us, then we can explore new possibilities. But it can't be just a theory laid on top of a person or a diagnostic label laid upon a top person. It has to be that humanitarian conversations, giving and taking and exploring and saying, "Oh no, you don't probably want to do that, do you? It sounds like it's awful. Like, could you do something else?" I mean, like, there's so many possibilities that can come up rather than having formulaic possibilities. And that's the hard part, is that when we take away the formulas for clinicians, often they're like kind of lost, because it's like, well, what if I don't have this tool set? Or what if I don't have these concrete parameters that I've been hanging on to? And how do I do this? And that's why I think to invite people that are already doing this and invite people that are new to these ideas of collaboration to be together and to walk together. And then to invite also people on their panels, of our panels, who are receiving services or who have received services in the past. You know, for me, my whole journey has been listening to what other people want. And that in itself is one of those things that you would probably call a skill set in itself, right, David?
Yes, absolutely.
So I know that our wonderful guests that I've heard in the past where you have talked about how important it was for clinicians to see you as a person and not through those lenses that I was talking about. Could you maybe talk about how it felt to be able to help clinicians see how that wasn't something that was all the time helpful for you?
It was so having the opportunity to share my thoughts and feelings of not only like going through the mental health system, but also of like, this journey of trying to learn how do I work with people? How do I listen to people? Was really just an opportunity that I'm so grateful for, and it felt very empowering. Because like you were saying before, you can't, like, people need humanity. You can't just put slap a label on someone and expect them to be okay. Like, people need genuine care and genuine empathy, and they need to be seen and recognized. And I felt seen, and I felt recognized, and I felt empowered. And I think that that's the really magical thing about these conferences, is that we're holding space not only to like empower people, but also to learn how to empower.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a beautiful process that I'm so grateful to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. You know, I heard that described as one point in time getting out of the way of people. Because if people's problems do heal with time, and my goodness, life can be full of horrible suffering. But if people heal with time and with support, then sometimes we can accidentally prevent that from occurring when we do have like these formulaic ways doing things that people might unfortunately think that for the rest of their life, they're a diagnosis that they cannot get out of. That because it's such a pervasive idea in our culture at this point in time that, like, let's just say that somebody's having a hard time. Well, the first thing that you think about is like, let's send them to the psychiatrist, right? If they're having a really hard time. Or let's send them to the ER if they're having a really hard time. Instead of what are maybe some things that we can do that isn't about sending someone to an ER or to a psychiatrist when you have those people that have had those services say that those services didn't serve them in the way that they wanted it to. And so I just think that this allows having people on panels. It allows for the clinicians to have this fresh sense that other things can happen. Because I remember, David, when you first came to us, you were working at a place where there was no freshness. That's what sent you to us. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was not even freshness. It was repressive.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a place where there was no hope. It was just like, you are this diagnosis and you're going to have to live with it. And we could give you drugs. And if you don't take these drugs, you're never going to get better. And that's it. This is your cast for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't live with that. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
live within that system
Mm-hmm.
and promote that system.
Mm-hmm.
So I took
Well,
it upon myself to find a different system that worked, and I was introduced to Now I See a Person in a whole different way of looking at people's symptoms as a reaction to their environment,
mm-hmm.
not a
Mm-hmm.
internal problem.
Mm-hmm. And that is the quandary, because what will happen is that, let's just say that you're fighting with your parents, or you have a different opinion of what your life should be. If you have a severe mental illness diagnosis, those types of things can be seen as being abnormal. That your disagreements are because you're bipolar, or you're in an episode, or you're obsessed with the parent, or, like all of these normal things that are happening to you in an abnormal situation are then defined as being very abnormal. And it kind of, in some ways, accidentally takes away your voice. So, once you have maybe 4 or 5 hospitalizations underneath your belt, your voice diminishes in favor of that diagnosis. And we hear a lot of people talking about that was very oppressive for them. And I think that our panel member might have a couple of ideas on that.
So currently the system in place where how people address mental health in America, it's like David was saying, like it's very medication based. It's also very, very, very oppressive. I know that I've had my personal experiences with the going through the psychiatric system. So things that, you know, were normal teenage things, because this was like when I was like the age of 12, 13, like things where it's like if I had like an what clinicians would call an episode, in other cases that may just be, oh, okay, she's 13 and she's just hormonal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that, because I had the label of like being under the mental health, that's then a reason for me to get locked up in a psychiatric hospital. Mm-hmm. Which is really unfortunate, and it's very intense and almost brutal, I would say, because you know, some people are just really sensitive, And there's nothing wrong with that. We're supposed to feel this world and we're supposed to be impacted by it. But when someone experiences trauma, sometimes their reactions may be quote unquote intense, but it doesn't mean that they're trying to cause harm to the world around them with their reactions. And the current mental health system kind of teaches us to be afraid of our emotions. And that's not good at all, because we all have emotions, right? We're all meant to feel. We're sentient beings. We're meant to feel things. So, I know in my personal experience, like whenever I would start to get anxious, the doctors would be like, oh, you just take a pill and you become numb and then it's fine. Well, the problem with that is that then the world is filled with little anxieties. It's riddled with. And you can't exactly take a magic pill to address all of the things that make us slightly anxious. There are things that we need to work through. So instead, I feel like I really started to grow and benefit when I started to look at my anxieties and attack them head on instead of trying to numb myself with them. But yeah, like I said, I'm very excited to see the shift that we're trying to create through these conversations, because I think that if you teach a bunch of people who are struggling with coping with stress or coping with traumas to just lean towards medication, you're going to create a generation of addicts, which is horrific. I don't want that on anyone. I don't want anyone to think that they can only solve their problems with pills. I want people to be empowered and feel like, hey, it may be hard right now, whatever I'm doing, but I can work through it. I can breathe through this. It may be super stressful or super sad or upsetting, or even like on the other end, this may be really joyful. But just because it's really positive or joyful doesn't mean you're manic.
Right.
Like, just because you're stressed out, that doesn't mean you need to be in a straitjacket.
Right.
It just means that you're going through the motions of existence itself. And going back to the panel, like we were talking about normalizing these things, humanizing them. It's normal to feel. It's not normal to be robotic and zombie-ish and constantly medicated. That's not normal. What's normal is to feel, to be impacted by our environment, and also be empowered enough to feel that we can change our environment when we have the opportunity to. And we can grow with it.
One of the things that made me think of was that we had written in 2021 on shedding the limits of severe mental illness narratives for a peace and Mad in America. And as someone who was able to shed the limits of severe mental illness narratives, what words would you use to describe that?
I would probably say that by shedding the labels of mental health narratives, I have learned to reclaim my power. And I have learned to use my voice and to learn how to express myself. And sometimes expressing myself isn't always in a verbal manner, but I no longer hold any guilt around my emotional state, because I know that I have the ability to do with what I want this energy. Like if I'm severely anxious, then maybe not severely, because I try to avoid, like the second I start feeling any kind of anxious, I instantly start doing yoga or meditate or breathing exercises, and that shifts my mood back to something that is more calming and centering. Or if I'm feeling like any kind of sadness, because sadness comes and goes, I sometimes like to paint or even like um read. Or yeah, I just feel like shedding these labels of these diagnoses has forced me to reclaim my emotions in a sense that is empowering. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
no longer view my emotional state as a handicap or
Mm-hmm.
something that's holding me back. I
Right.
see it as, okay, this is an energy that I can work with to then create something.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I was saying, like I like to paint sometimes, like if I'm feeling sad, or if I'm really, really joyful, then I like to dance and sing. And,
Mm-hmm.
just learning how to express my feelings has been really phenomenal for me.
And I would assume that there's a newfound trust that you can be the person you are without any of those labels that were once given to you by people that were taller than you, and that that's not an identity that you're willing to accept.
Yeah, I would say I do definitely have so much more trust in myself. Like, I know that to be quite blank, I know I'm not going to hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm not like at a point where I feel like I'm going to cause damage to myself, because I know now how to regulate my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that on its own is super empowering. And,
Mm-hmm.
the main reason why, like, I was, when I was like 14 and I was feeling my emotions and then I was taught to be afraid of them, I would admit myself into hospitals because I was afraid I was going to hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come to a point now in my existence where it's like, I know I'm not going to hurt myself. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no need to be afraid of the emotions, because I know like how different behaviors impact me. And that's just like something that like time gives you, like the more you kind of experiment with different, like, let's say, use the word coping skills or activities, you learn, okay, well, how does this thing make me feel after? I learned that hurting myself, like cutting myself or, over medicating myself, didn't serve me. So I shifted then to, okay, with this emotion, I'm going to do something else that's going to end up making me feel better in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, I've learned how to like set boundaries with myself so much better, just by like doing these little that I don't want to say experimentations, but like doing these little trials with myself of like, okay, like I'm not feeling so great right now. Let's go outside and run in the rain and let's see how that feels. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, this feels great. Or maybe it doesn't feel great. And then I just take note of that and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that what happens is that you do what the rest of us schlubs do, and we just kind of like, yeah, what am I going to do? Like, make myself maybe feel a little bit better today, because we don't have anything to fear anymore. We don't have to be afraid that, oh, this emotion is going to grow into an episode. We're just like, oh man, that is not really good, and I want that to go away. And it's nothing more than that. It's nothing more than, life feeds us trauma, right? It has ups and downs and wonderful joys and wonderful like not joys, and like, but we maneuver that without having to be labeled, and to have to non humanize our own selves with ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Taking back the label of like mental health problems is all about just being like, hey man, we all feel things. it's okay. Sometimes it's intense, but we'll work through it. And
Mhm.
everybody feels things, and there's nothing wrong with you for feeling things, even if it's super intense. Like, I know that, like, when my grandma died, like, my whole world felt like it stopped, but I'm okay, and I make it through the day. And I think that, I couldn't, for a moment, like, I couldn't do anything but learn how to paint portraits. And there's something beautiful within that, is that I use my grief to try to teach myself how to commemorate and care more. And pain is a part of human existence, unfortunately, but we can work through it. And no one's alone in their grief. Every other human feels things that impact them deeply.
Mm-hmm. So just very quickly, we're going to give David the last thoughts to kind of sum everything up. And then we hope for people to join us and a couple of months for uh, a meeting, and to be able to discuss these things and ideas that people have had since the meeting, and to create newness. So David, would you like to kind of like give us a couple of your reflections, and then we'll end?
Yeah, I mean, I really resonated with what was said. We do have the answers within us to feel better, to you know, feel our emotions, allow them, deal with them in whatever capacity we feel is appropriate and helpful to us, and then let them go. And just because we have emotions that might be heightened in a particular context doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us mentally. Um, so yeah, so that's essentially what I got from this conversation.
And that we look forward to so many more conversations about this, of humanizing our mental health, humanizing our mental wellness, and being able to be a team working together of clinicians and clients. All righty. Well, thank you all so much, and we would look forward to the next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Please honor this person's story by sharing with others to inspire hope.